Fawning isn't people pleasing. It's not codependency. It's a trauma response. In case anyone out there is like, what the hell is fawning? I got you. Okay, I got you. Fawning is when your nervous system decides that the safest way for you to survive is by making other people comfortable, even if that means abandoning yourself. Saying yes when you mean no. It's over explaining, over apologizing, shape shifting into whoever you think someone else needs you to be. It's not a choice. It's a reflex your body learned when being yourself felt too dangerous. And if you grew up in a dysfunctional family, your nervous system is probably really damn good at it. Welcome to Adult Child, where we take a deep dive into the impact of growing up in a dysfunctional family. If you're new here, I'm Andrea Ashley. I'm a total and complete shit show. And today I'm joined by therapist and author of the new book, Fawning: Why the Need to Please Makes Us Lose Ourselves and How to Find Our Way Back, the one and only Miss Ingrid Clayton. So this conversation is raw, vulnerable, deep. I ask the questions that you won't hear anywhere else. We are diving into how fawning shows up in your relationships, in your friendships, in your sex life, in your parenting, even in just the relationship with yourself, and what actually needs to happen on a nervous system level for it to change. This isn't surface level. This is some deep shit. Let's do it. She's back. Author of two books, Miss Ingrid Clayton, who I'm deeming the queen of fawning.
And I am wearing that crown rather proudly. Thank you.
So the book comes out tomorrow.
Yes.
And what I wanted to ask you was, and folks, she already said nobody asked her this question before, so I'm just going to say that again. We were chatting before we started recording, and she said that I was asking her if she enjoys writing, and she said that through writing, she's able to gain deeper insights into yourself. So I wanted to know what came up for you in writing this book. Were there any big ahas?
Yes. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me, so my personal experience of needing to live in a chronic fawn response was out of childhood trauma, right? So um, that's just my lived experience. And
Is
then
it
when
ever not?
Yeah, which so I'll speak to some of the
That's
other
interesting.
context, which was really sort of profound for me to see when you sort of widen that lens or pull back and you look beyond just the family system, how many systems of power are so many of us living in and navigating day in and day out, right? So you look at communities, you look at religion, like, culture and politics and all these things. And really, any marginalized community, any community that is disempowered, or any community where you don't hold all the power is ripe for a fawn response. And so as I was looking at my experiences, I'll be honest and I'll say, even in terms of people of color or people in LGBTQ communities, which I do not identify in either case, I felt more of a connection to those marginalized communities than maybe I ever had before. I could see the connective tissue in our experiences. So in a way, it really sort of broadened my sense of empathy and compassion in ways that were profound for me, right? It was sort of like it dropped me even deeper into the human condition, and the human condition where I'm living amongst all these other humans who, in some way, we have more similar experience than we may even realize.
That's interesting because I guess it's all those other things are like trauma in a sense, but maybe not relational trauma. But I wonder if the fawn response on an I mean, it's always a nervous system thing. Like if one could develop that from experiencing trauma like later on in life and having
Yes.
not experienced that during their upbringing.
Yes. So I say absolutely. And for me, I think complex trauma are synonymous with relational trauma. It just depends on how you're defining relationship, right? Your relationship to your environment is relational. Your
Mhm.
relationship to your community, right? Like, oh my gosh, my community holds my whole world. And yet I can't really be my whole self in order to belong. There's this double bind that exists typically with the fawn response. And I think it's also why many of us are primed and conditioned to be fawners, whether that's in
Mm.
our childhood or in the workplace, for instance, right? There are these perpetual hierarchies, and the body just intuitively knows, right? It's almost in relation, the relationship in this case is my relationship to the hierarchies in which I reside day in, day out. And my body knows where I exist in that pecking order. And that if I am not at the top, right? So we can say to someone like, well, just have a voice, right? Just speak up for yourself or set boundaries. It's like, that is not available to me. There will be dire consequences if I do. And, enter the fawn response from stage left. It's like the body knows that these other things are not available or would make it worse. So I really think this understanding of the larger context that not only support fawning, but quite frankly, expect it
Mm.
was powerful for me to see.
Mm. It's really interesting. Yeah, it really broadens the brush, which is good for
Yeah,
you. More readers.
that's true.
Right?
Sadly, but yes, from a publishing standpoint, I guess it's good.
Yeah. Um, so last time we talked about your journey of realizing how much your childhood impacted you.
Yeah.
Um, and I wanna kinda take that same question, but from the lens of fawning, and I remember you sharing that, for a long time, you thought that you were struggling with codependency,
Mm,
um, and then to eventually realize that this really was the fawn trauma response, and so
yeah.
I'm curious what that journey of realizing that looked like.
It's such a good question. It's hard to kind of pinpoint in a way, but I can say that over time, that distinction for me became very important, right? That I never quite saw my whole self reflected in the terminology of either codependency or people pleasing. And so the more that I have understood the fawn response, explored it, unpacked it in this way, the more freedom I have found, the more I have made sense to myself, the more that I see how A, my body is hardwired for safety and survival. Fawning comes on without my conscious awareness. It's not a choice, it's a reflex, right? Um, I make sense, in other words, right? And I think when we look historically at certainly the original definitions of codependency and people pleasing, they are steeped in this idea that you're a problem and you're broken and you're a control freak and what's wrong with you? Like, knock it off already. They're steeped in this a ton of shame and even the idea that we have a disease, right? So we are dysfunctional, in other words. Fawning to me places these behaviors not only back in our body, like I said, we're hardwired for these instincts, but back into the environments in which we're navigating. So I'm not dysfunctional. I'm responding in a very healthy and adaptive way to dysfunctional environments. So just if the listener takes away that one point, I think for most people, they can just feel the shame sort of like running out of their body. It returns us to a sense of agency, which is what we've been seeking our whole lives anyway, right? I can finally belong to myself and feel proud of myself because I go, I'm not dysfunctional. I don't have a disease. I'm not broken. In fact, it's not a self esteem problem. That's the other piece of it. I, in
Mm.
fact, love myself so much that my body intuitively was like threading this very fine needle of all these other responses aren't really available for me, but I'm not giving up, right? It's like it's this last ditch effort almost to say, I'm going to continue to navigate this situation so that I can hopefully come away as unscathed as possible.
Would you ever say that there are instances where people pleasing doesn't qualify as fawning?
It's such a great question and a common one. And I feel like maybe I'm going to get more information down the line because I go, "Oh, I didn't consider that." But today as I sit here, I cannot really think of an instance where I guess if you call people pleasing where you really are engaging in this like conscious brown nosing, sort of like, maybe that is a little bit different. It's sort of, you're doing it
Like where you're playing the
intentionally.
game almost?
Yes, but even that, there's like a fine sort of, line between these worlds where I think even with the fawn response, again, if you sort of know, like, I'm going into the lion's den, right? Like, maybe there is a more conscious ish kind of presentation of fawning, but I don't know. I think it's a tricky question. I haven't found like a concrete example where I feel like, aha, this would be people pleasing without any fawn response attached to it. I think the fawn response tends to be the heartbeat of these behaviors.
Yeah, I think, just thinking about it out loud, like if it's true people pleasing, because I was thinking in the sense of like, I don't know, even like in a business transaction, but
Yeah.
I think that that would be more people pleasing, uh, it more manipulation masquerading as people pleasing, you
Right.
know?
That's interesting. Yes, I think maybe that's the reason that I haven't been able to sort of say, because when we talk about people pleasing, we're not necessarily talking about conscious manipulation,
Yeah.
right? We're talking about really just propping other people up and sort of, so, but to your point, I think yes, if you're just talking about strictly conscious manipulation and you're doing it with a smile, that's different. That's different.
Mm. Um, I want you to explain how fawning is a hybrid nervous system response, and it's the only one, right?
Well, it depends on the model that you're working in. So, Peter Levine of somatic experiencing famously talked about the freeze response also as a hybrid.
Mhm.
And he explained it this way, which I love, which is that one foot is on the gas, which is essentially fight flight energy, but one foot is on the brake, right? Which is this down regulation, frozen experience. So, in the freeze response, there's a lot of activation like you experience in fight or flight, but it's just that it's frozen. The brake is containing it where you can't do anything with it. That's that deer in the headlights presentation, right? So that contains both hyperarousal and hypo arousal at the same time. So fawning is similar. We have one aspect that is we're mobilized, right? There's the adrenaline, we're showing up, we're hyper vigilant, we're noticing, we're managing the moods and the states of those around us. But the hypoarousal is the part that disconnects from self, right? It's the reason that in almost all the signs and symptoms for fawning include some level of self-abandonment. And ultimately, this is because the body has to choose in this double bind, right? Am I going to choose safety and survival, or am I going to choose, like, you know, access to my fullest, highest self? The body will always choose safety and survival. So that's the current understanding in terms of it being a hybrid presentation, right? So you're not actively making it worse by fighting back or running, particularly you think about children, those options are not available to us. But you're also not going all the way towards what we call a submit or collapse response. That's what we see, particularly in the animal kingdom, where the animal just plays dead, right? It's this last ditch effort. And it's different from freeze. That's why I say it depends on the model that you're referring to, because some people equate the two. But I actually like the differentiation that freeze, there is all of that adrenalized, racing heartbeat going on. With submit, you're not, it's a playing dead because there's no muscle tone. The body goes limp, right?
Mm.
Different from a freeze response where there's this rigidity, that deer in headlights. Submit is like literally you could be scooped up in the claws of the animal, and the prey animal. The animal thinks it's dead, right? And hopefully the it sets it down long enough that that little prey animal can kind of scamper away. But it's a completely numb feeling. And so fawning is kind of in the middle of those two poles. We're not fighting back, we're not running, we're not making it worse. We also have to show up day in and day out, right? So there's this hybrid presentation that looks different depending on the context, but tends to have both of these flavors happening at the same time.
So I'm assuming that you heard about fawning when you read Pete Walker's book for the first time, right?
Well, actually, I heard about it when I was writing my memoir, and maybe even previous to that, writing something for Psychology Today. I was not aware of Pete Walker's work, and I was unpacking these same themes, right? Sort of going on my own path, like, why aren't we talking about this experience? I knew there was something there. And so I was articulating it,
And
not in,
what and when you mean this experience, what do you mean? Like these
well,
behaviors and having it not fall under the category of codependency or what?
yes, correct. Yes. There was, particularly as it relates to sexual fawning, I think that that was being missed. There were just aspects that I was talking about, writing about, and someone who read what I had written said, "This reminds me of Pete Walker's work. Have you heard of him?" And I said, "No."
Mm.
And so, of course, I ran and immediately saw myself reflected in fawning. And it was one of the major puzzle pieces that I got from writing my own story. So, not just reclaiming what happened to me, right? Validating it myself, not waiting for anyone else to validate it. But once I did that, once I could see that, yes, my experience was complex trauma, and this is where I lived for decades after the fact in this chronic fawn response coming online, whether I was safe or not, right? My body wasn't going to wait to find out. Um, it changed my life essentially, and it's changed my clients' lives, and that's why this more deeper specific dive on fawning, because it's kind of been the trauma response that's hiding in plain sight. It hasn't received nearly the attention that it deserves. Um, so I'm thrilled to be able to sort of take the magnifying glass now, both on my story. There are aspects of my story in there too, but I needed to broaden that and show a diverse set of experiences, how fawning can look different, right? Depending on who you are and the context that you're in. And
Well, it probably is the most prevalent of the responses. Like when we look at the laundry list traits of an adult child, I mean,
right.
those are all fawning. Like
Oh,
this is probably the fawn response is what causes us the most pain, I would say 95% of the time, right?
wow. That's powerful what you're saying. And I would imagine that it's true. You know,
Yeah.
the thing that saved us ultimately, the thing that helped us adapt and survive these environments becomes the thing that's keeping us stuck and small and in our own way. Yeah.
Was this something that like cuz you're talking about just this was something that you were unpacking. Like, was this an aspect about yourself that, like, you couldn't, like, wrap your brain around? Like, was this something that you felt like, I don't know, you were trying to work through for a long time and, like, you just couldn't figure out why you were the way you were?
Yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. And let's be real, I wasn't just doing it on my own. I've sat on a lot of therapist
Yeah,
couches
yeah.
over the years, right? I'm now 51 years old. I dedicated my life essentially to trying to unpack some of these things. No one ever named my experiences as trauma or complex trauma. And certainly no one put my responses in the context of trauma. And part of that is the fact that we're only just now, we didn't know some of these things even when I was in graduate school. Um, but some of it is that I think even the mental health field now is not up to speed, right? It's like, as you know, complex PTSD still not in the DSM, like all of these challenges that we face to kind of legitimize our experiences, to give it concrete language and ways in. It's been a bit maddening. And so, yes, me everything I've done my whole life, including ultimately going to graduate school and getting 3 degrees in psychology and going to all these trauma trainings, all of it has ultimately been in service of, why do I still feel so stuck? Because I have earnestly tried, right? It's like I read all those books. I did all the workshops. You know what I mean? How long am I going to have to sit here and meditate? When am I finally going to be relieved of this feeling that I'm stuck, that my relationships are not healthy? I know that there's more for me out there, and yet I cannot access it. And this work is the work that has finally freed me.
Mm, it's beautiful.
It's so big.
It is huge. It was really interesting for me to listen back to, our first conversation just because of everything I've been through and learned since then, and,
Wow.
especially from, like, I've started doing parts work since then, which I do wanna get into, parts work, but, before we get into all that, a couple of questions. So, one of the things that you talked about was how for some people, fawning shows up as being more of yourself, like bringing out more of yourself versus for some people it's about being less of yourself.
Yeah.
Um I'm curious if you could speak to that and if you have noticed any sort of patterns as far as what would cause one to go one way or the other.
Yeah.
And is
That's
it a typically like, are you seeing people vacillate between both, or do people tend to stick on one side of the spectrum?
Yeah, I'd say it's both because some people stay on one side of the spectrum. Some are in different contexts that elicit a different response. And so then it shifts. But ultimately, what you're saying is yes. So fawning sometimes looks like an over functioning. And that tends to originate from experiences of neglect or abandonment, right? Maybe emotional immaturity or generational trauma. Basically, your needs were not being met. And so part of the response, then the adaptive response is to go, well, then I'm just going to do everything I can possibly do to meet all my own needs. And maybe if I help you with yours too, you're eventually going to come online and we can kind of do this together. So there's this sense that, like, not only do I have to soak up all the shame and this dysfunction, kind of like metabolize it through my own body because no one else is going to be doing their own work, but I also have to be responsible for all the things, everyone's emotional well-being, right? There is just this, like, I have to be bigger because you are essentially absent, okay? On the other end of that equation, where you might sort of say we're under functioning or we're not bringing as much of ourselves, it's that feeling of, and I would say too that I kind of call that first side of the spectrum is like the caretaking side. The over functioning tends to be synonymous with the caretaking side. This other side, it tends to be the appeasement side, right? So here we tend to lean on this when it feels like we're being attacked, someone's moving in, we are not safe. There's overt abuse happening to us. And even as I'm doing this with my hand, there's this sort of closing in. I have to get smaller in order to survive it. Oh my God, your needs matter so much more than mine. I can't even hardly exist in this equation, but I have to remind you that I'm still a person and you like me, don't you? So in this case, getting bigger or even right sized, like occupying your full self and agency, would feel threatening because you're moving against the source of the aggression, right? In other words, it's like you don't have an access to a healthy fight response of having a voice and taking up space and setting boundaries. The way to survive wasn't getting small. So getting bigger, or like I said, occupying just your own God-given right to exist in the world, feels terrifying. It feels like you become a bigger target.
Yeah,
So
that fear of being seen.
that's right. Yeah, the fear of being seen. So, in both of these presentations, you go, well, gosh, they're so different. But ultimately, we're still managing the gap between who we are and what's happening in the environment. It's just whatever that environment necessitates is what the body's going to shape shift into, right? Who do I need to be in order to navigate this situation? And that's why it can shift depending on context.
Can fawning show up like even when we're not having an interaction with another person? Like, does it show up just in our relationship with ourself?
You ask the best questions. You're just reminding me of my experience in our other conversation. They're so unique. It's so beautiful.
I just winging it, baby.
I know, but you're so embedded in the depth of the conversation.
We get deep here.
I love it. So, yes, it does show up because you go back to thinking about that hybrid presentation. Okay, I'll say this. It shows up if you have an experience of a chronic fawn response,
Mm,
which is probably what adult children tend to have. It's where the term originates, right? It's sort of like I'm still experiencing these things, these unmet needs, this residue from the past. Um, So, a chronic fawn response, if we go back to that hybrid idea, one half of that means I'm disconnected from self. Do I even know what it feels like to have my own back, even when no one else is around? Do I have the sense of space and time and curiosity, even in my own body, to notice what am I actually experiencing?
Mm.
What do I actually feel? We are so habituated to the external environment or what other people might perceive us to be that we confuse that external mirror, as it were, for our true self. Our self is this false identity that is reflected back to us from the environment, right? It's that maybe the only self we've ever known. It was never safe enough to build internal safety, to be the center of your own skin and your own life, and to branch out from there. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it sneaks into every aspect of your life.
Let's talk about this sexual fawning.
Yeah.
Um, did you feel like that was something that you were I know that you have personal experience, but was it something that was also showing up in working with clients and you felt like it wasn't getting the attention that it deserved or it wasn't
Absolutely. I feel like sexual fawning was kind of couched in these other ways
maybe
where,
you could define it in the way that you would define it?
yes. So if fawning is necessary when we are disempowered, right? You think about children, you think of systems of power. And I'll just use my personal experience. So I'm a child, I don't have any power in my home, and yet I'm being sexualized at the same time by my stepfather, right? So before I've had any sexual experience, even a first kiss, my body has a sense that, oh, the only power I actually have in the world resides in me being a sex object.
Mm.
Okay. Patriarchy supports this, all kinds of systems support this. So it's very common. I mean, you could probably look at the Me Too movement and point to sexual fawning all over the map. So the point being, now I go out in the world as I start to get older and I've inhabited myself as a sexual being. My body still remembers and knows that my essential currency in the world lies in my being attractive or appealing or sexual to you. And it would have me flirting with people that I was not remotely interested in, but sort of hoping to keep them at arm's length at the same time. There were lots of boundary violations. Most of my sexual experience was mired in what is very common in my clients' experiences, where we go, was I even experiencing pleasure? Do I even deserve pleasure? Because I'm completely oriented to what you're experiencing, even in terms of like, oh, I need to remember where their hand was on my body. So tomorrow I could go and put my own hand there and see what they felt when their hand was on my body. Like, was that feeling good enough for them? Or did I feel lumpy or whatever? It's like we're completely
Mm.
oriented to the other person. I've heard so many stories on my couch. Like, you know, the second that I almost open this gate for people, they're like ready to go. They're holding these things and they go, I know what you're talking about, right? It's like, oh, maybe I was on my period, but I didn't want to like slow things down or have to run to the bathroom. And so I just didn't tell him about it. And I had sex with a tampon in. Like there's just a million stories like that. Right? It's like, I don't want to bum you out. I don't want to take care of myself and ask for protection because I'm not on birth control. And so, oh, I get it. Yeah, that doesn't really feel good for you. And so, if it doesn't feel good for you, well, guess I'm going to put myself in harm's way. Right? We don't do this intentionally, but the fawn response is so wedded to sexuality in all of these ways,
Mm.
where, particularly if it comes from childhood, you never had an opportunity to develop a natural, healthy sort of sexual development. It was robbed from you, right? It gets robbed from us just like our generosity and our empathy and our caretaking. All of these things are wonderful qualities to have, right? As is being a sexual person, we have bodies for a reason. But all of these things can be co-opted in the fawn response. And it's sort of like the body knows, oh, this is the thing that's going to get me in your good graces, right? So, of course, sexuality is going to go right in that same vein.
Did fawning show up for you differently in romantic relationships compared to in friendships?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I am a monogamous person, and so the pressure I think that that puts on, like, finding a partner and having them choose you back, even all the fairy tale idea around, like, being chosen and getting married. It's like I tried so hard not to get swept up in all of that, but the truth is I was a bit on a mission, right? It was like, "No, no, 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 no. I'm gonna be okay when I achieve these external markers of being okay." And so I think my fawn response was a bit on overdrive in the romance department for that reason. Um, but similarly, in terms of not having access to a full self, that showed up in all of my relationships. But I do feel fortunate that I do have some long-term friendships in particular that feel like, they've known me since the beginning of time. And I don't feel like maybe there was as much damage there. But anywhere you could fawn, I've probably
You've
experienced
done
it.
it? Well, okay, that brings up my next parent question is how does fawning show up in parenting?
Girl, you are on fire. Okay, so one of the things that coincided with my losing my stepfather, which gave me more access to myself before I started writing my memoir about, like, oh, wait a second. Like, I feel safer on the planet now that he's gone. Let me go back and sort of revisit some of these things. What was happening alongside that is that I became a mom.
Yep.
And my son's very normal, typical sort of tantrums, like being a baby and then a toddler in the world, were deeply triggering to me. So, one of the things that we're guarding against in a chronic fawn response is any conflict or upset at all. So, his, like I said, normal, healthy upset, it I didn't have a place to put it. I was not, it kind of blindsided me, to be honest. Here I was a therapist, and I'd always thought I'd be such a great mom, and I was always the auntie and showing up for other people's kids and doing crafts and all the things. I was like Mary Poppins, right? But here I am in my own life with my own child in my house, and I'm like, I felt not only overwhelmed, but there was a part of me that it's so gross to admit, so hard to admit. I resented his ability to have access to the full range of human emotion, right? There was this, like, really primitive part of me that was almost like, it's my turn to be the adult and you should fawn for me, right? This was
Mhm.
the feeling. So, um, that's one way that it can come up in our parenting. And quite frankly, I think even a lot of parenting manuals can almost be teaching and fostering a fawn response under the guise of respect, right? You respect your elders. We don't do this so much now, but those notions of, like, children should be seen and not heard. It's like there's a lot of that energy that can still be passed down, and we're doing a disservice to our kids. There's that saying, children cannot regulate emotions they're not allowed to have. And the same is true for trauma survivors. It's like we're literally learning to experience and feel and communicate about these feelings, maybe for the first time, which is why reparenting can be such an important part of a healing process. Um, but the other way fawning can show up in parenting is just the, like,
I would think
that
on the opposite
caretaking
end of the
piece.
spectrum, right? Like on
Yeah,
the where you're
yeah,
like appeasing or,
yes.
where you
Well,
don't
you're
have you're not firm enough.
exactly. You're not giving the kid any sense of personal responsibility. You're going to sort of run circles around them and clean up all the messes. And in a way, you're not giving them the opportunity to sort of step into their capacity and to know how to not only feel their feelings, but like be a person in the world that has other relationships, right? Because you're doing all the fixing and the caretaking and the appeasing for them. And it really cripples kids in a similar but different way.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what were the what did addressing fawning look like for you from a parts perspective?
Wow. I actually, it makes me think of a client that I talk about in the book because she refers to her little fawners, which are the lots of little fawning parts that came online, right? So we've already explored how fawning can show up differently depending on the context and in all these different ways. So I identify with this too, that I have different parts that fawn in different situations for different reasons. Um, but they all have that same protective mechanism, right? That's their role is like, I'm going to keep Ingrid safe, right? I'm going to get out ahead of this thing and I'm going to sort of fawn. Um, but I love parts work generally for this, but specifically when we're looking at fawning, that it creates a little bit of distance between you and the behavior or you and the experience. And now suddenly I can relate to it differently and bring more awareness, more conscious awareness, more compassion. I love the notion in internal family systems of unburdening the parts, right? If a part really still feels like, no, 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 I got to protect Ingrid, it's not going to stop that behavior,
Mhm.
which is also why some of the old stigmatizing and pathologizing terms, it's just they don't meet us with that energy of going, oh my gosh, this part served such a vital purpose. And I'm going to honor that first and even thank the part and say, thank you so much. And do you see where I am in my life now? Do you see how old I am? Do you see the capacity that I have? Do you still want to do that job? And sometimes the part's like, no, I want to go play. And then you can let it go and do that. But it creates more access and I think ownership. I love parts work for complex trauma generally, but for looking at fawning specifically, for sure.
Did you have any protectors where, cuz these parts are formed at such, at younger points in time, where we might think when we're like looking at it from our adult mind that we understand what it thinks that it's doing,
Yeah.
but not really, because it's not something that would come to our conscious mind. So I'm curious if there was anything there where like you were surprised at either like the role that it was playing, or just some sort of a belief that maybe one of your parts had that was like a little, I don't know, like shocking
Yeah.
or.
I mean, I can't come up with a specific example, but to your point, I think I'm always surprised. There is a very different experience between me, my adult self, and what my mind likes to tell me that it knows about a thing, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
no
I'm going to
shit.
figure it out, right? I'm going to analyze it and I'm going to break it down. Almost every time when I'm working from an experiential or somatic or parts place, the wisdom of the body, the wisdom of these parts, boy, they are so much smarter than my conscious present tense mind, and they have a lot to teach me. So this is one of the hardest things, but one of the best things that when I see my clients kind of get out of their own way in this way of like, I'm going to figure it out and I'm smart enough and oh no no no, I know already. It's like we don't. Let's put that on the shelf and restore this deeper gut place wisdom, right? The gut being sort of your second brain. I think it's way smarter than the thing walking around on our shoulders.
Mm, mhm.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like addressing fawning, um, we've talked about parts work and that being so important.
Mm.
Um, but I would imagine, and from reading in the book, like this has to be done on a nervous system level. Like, this isn't something where, okay, now I understand why I do this, so I'm gonna be able to stop doing this.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think understanding takes us a fair amount of the way, right? Understanding can diminish the shame, which oftentimes one of the biggest barriers to healing is the shame. So I think, that sort of takes us halfway down the road. But yes, I think if you're looking to work with a therapist, at the very bare minimum, they need to be trauma informed. But I would say the preference is always that they are trauma trained. And that means they have at least one, if not a couple or several specific modalities for working with relational trauma. And there are too many to name, you know. So I hesitate to go there. I only share the experience in the book from my practice. So it's related to internal family systems, somatic experiencing, and EMDR, but there are so many modalities out there. But it tends to be crucial to your point, right? Because you can't fix an unconscious response with the conscious mind. It speaks two different languages.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
So, how long have you been married to your husband now?
11 years?
11 years. Okay.
Yeah.
When did you start your childhood trauma healing journey?
Well, it depends on
Like
when you say,
complex trauma.
yeah, well, I actually think what started me really on that was leaving my first marriage,
Yeah.
because I had never broken up with anyone I had ever dated before leaving my first marriage. I stayed and I hoped and I waited and I was helpful, right? I was chronic fawn all over the place. But finding the ability to walk away from my first marriage that was not working, to say, I'm finally going to stop waiting for you to choose me back and I'm just going to choose me, was crucial. And I think if I hadn't have done that, I would not have been available for someone like Yancey, who I'm married to now, right? So there was, it wasn't like nothing was happening before, but he and I were married, and like I said, we had our son Henry when really my world shattered, and I found myself at this very table at 3 o'clock every morning, pouring out my story over my memoir for years at a time, and the amazing thing is that every time, God, this is going to make me emotional. Every time I would like shake my fist at the sky or be like, what am I doing this for? This is like crazy making. What I could not understand why this was happening. I certainly wasn't getting any support, or like couldn't find an agent, or no one really cared about it. I'm like, then take this thing away from me, this obsession. It just felt so crippling. And my husband would hear me and watch me shake my fist and hear me say, I'm not going to keep doing this. And he would just love me and go, mm-hmm. And then the next morning I'd be like, okay, I got to keep going. And he's like, I know you do. And he just trusted my process when I was so in the weeds and I didn't know which way was up. And I'm so grateful to him for that. And he even saw this Fawning book long before I could ever see it. Midway through my memoir, he's like, you're a writer, and you're going to write another book. And I was like, no, what would I write about? You're out of your mind. And to be that seen and supported and loved by someone is like beyond.
Huge.
Yeah.
Are you an anxious attacher, or were you?
Yes, I think I'm all of
Um,
the attachment styles, right? Depending. And I will be honest and say I never really connected with that language either. So it's not like I think in attachment styles, but you could lay the attachment styles probably directly over this, looking at trauma responses and complex trauma. It's because, we're talking about the same thing. It's just different words.
I was just curious about, like, what your experience was in dating him, like, in those earlier days,
Night and
because you
day.
had this, yeah, like, you realized you had a broken picker, which you realized eventually was trauma. But what did that look like? Was that like a nerve-wracking experience for you, or was this
Confusing.
different?
It was very different, which is what made it so confusing. I knew that I wanted something radically different, but I had no blueprint for it, right? And so, whereas pretty much every relationship prior to meeting him had that like crazy chemistry, that
Right
sort
off
of
the bat.
obsessive
Yeah.
feeling, right?
Yeah.
I did not have that with Yancey. I had one of the loveliest conversations, present, ease, interesting, smart, like it was just all there, but it because it didn't have that fiery sort of like, yeah, um, fuse that was slowly burning down.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, maybe we're just meant to be friends, right? Because I just truly did not know what it felt like to be in a healthy reciprocal relationship. And then, of course, I started to overanalyze and I was like, well, wait a
Yeah.
second.
Trying to find things wrong with him.
Yes, clearly he must not be right for me. And I found the things that I found. And fortunately, I turned to this amazing friend and mentor at the time. And I was like, I don't know. I think I'm doing it all over again. And he said, Ingrid, you were always trying to make the wrong person right. And now you're trying to make
Mm.
the right person wrong.
Mm.
And when he said it, my body just knew that it was true. And it's almost like in that moment, I let go of trying to figure it out and I allowed myself to be in this relationship with him and to experience something brand new. And it was just this funny thing where it still felt like it was just so easy. It's to this day the easiest relationship of my life. I've never questioned it. I've never questioned either of our loyalty or commitment. We've never lied to one another. I mean, the foundation is just rock solid. I trust it so completely. But at first it just felt like that thing that I would tell clients, like, well, do you want to see him again? You know? And it was like, yeah, I can't wait to see him again. And so I just trusted that, right? And it built from there.
How has fawning showed up in your relationship with him?
That's another great question. I think because I had never felt so safe, he gets a lot of the crispy underbelly that I wouldn't allow anyone else to experience, right? So if it's not safe for me to be a whole person in the world, but I have all of this like churning stuff,
The
guess who gets
crispy underbelly. I love it.
so the good news is that he's the kindest person I know, but he also doesn't take any shit. And he has a way of reflecting back to me when I don't know, either nitpicking him and sort of tearing him apart, or when I don't know, when I'm bringing stuff to him that isn't his. He has this way of making me see it and almost laugh at the absurdity. And then we can both sort of be together in how ridiculous it all is. I hope that that's changing over time, that the more that I can be more of myself in all the places, the less I have to dump on him at home. Do you know what I mean? He certainly deserves that, and I'm committed to that ongoing work, but I think that that's changed over time.
Mm, I
Yeah.
love that.
Mhm.
Um, so I wanted to follow up, like go a little bit deeper on a few of the things that we touched upon in your first interview.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about you going no contact with your mom.
Mhm.
And I think that it on a conscious level, we can understand that our parents' inability to take accountability um, or have a willingness to do the work like has nothing to do with us not being good enough or lovable enough. Obviously, like there's younger parts of us though that probably think that it does have to do with that. Um, And so I was curious if you could touch upon that and what did grieving that look like for you?
Wow. So in the years and years of writing my memoir, I was hyper focused on my stepdad, and my mom was still kind of getting a free pass, right? It was easier to see him for the abuser that he was, but I had a real hard time owning the depth of her neglect.
It's
And
coming to
so
terms with like the safer parent.
that's right. That's right. So This is what was so interesting about writing too, and maybe we talked about this before. As I was finishing what I at that point knew was going to be a memoir on my experience, I kept having to look at my story through the reader's eyes, right? And through the reader's eyes, it's like, mom is missing, right? But it was only for the sake of the reader, quite frankly. It was not because I was finally ready. It was like, oh my God, this story is not finished. Like, I have to look at this. And
Mhm.
having to look at it was the most devastating experience of my life, to finally feel and metabolize and feel the shattering of what had always been true, but that I had continued to kind of rise above it and dress it up and, you know, make it something else. To finally own that was so brutal. And it dropped me into what was a very real need to have no contact, because contact would have meant that I was still in harm's way, right? So it's almost like I was carrying all this wounding and I never really knew it. But now that I do, and I see that I'm essentially this gaping wound with not so much as a band-aid to hold it together, I needed to shore up a sense of safety, like my life depended on it. And safety meant I cannot be in relationship with people that have harmed me. And that, to your point, by not taking responsibility, by not admitting what happened, by not validating to like the tiniest degree, it's like there was a very low bar, but by not doing any of that, you are perpetuating that very harm. And no contact became almost like this, me cobbling together the only safety net I'd ever known. Right. And, what does grieving look like? It's,
Before you go there, what did that conversation with her look like when you finally set that boundary?
mm,
And so
well,
basically, just to recap too,
yeah,
even though people
yeah,
probably will have like reheard your story, but
yeah.
you initially, and if I'm remembering correctly, you initially came to your mom about the abuse when you were younger,
16. Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
At
When I was
how
16,
old? 16?
16.
And then and then once your stepfather passed away, you circled back to her on that with kind of a false hope that maybe that now that he's gone,
Yes,
she'll be willing to look at this.
because I'd endowed her for all of those years, those decades, with some sense of
She's
real
married
no.
to this man.
Yes, she was married to him the whole
Yeah.
time.
Yep.
And I really believed that she knew what happened, but quite frankly, was in her own fawn response, where her privileging her relationship with this man not only involved self-abandonment, she abandoned her kids, right? Not able to show up for them and advocate for them when we were literally asking for help. And so I did believe as he passed away, and I felt safer. I felt safer, even though he was hundreds of miles away. I didn't have much of a relationship with him. I felt safer in the world. And I imagined maybe she feels safer too. Maybe we can finally have a real relationship. It was, of course, what I'd always wanted. Who doesn't want that, right? But I knew we couldn't have it unless we finally addressed the elephant in the room, which is that she told me I made it all up and that I was a selfish liar and it didn't really happen.
Did you
And
ever speak about it with her again between 16 until this no.
I
Okay.
don't believe so. I don't have any memory of it. Nope. I went into like, okay, you're not available for that. But this is my family. And so I'm going to go along to get along. And it's just going to be the elephant in the room. And I'm going to tolerate it, right? Like I'm going to deal with your lack of seeing me, respecting me, honoring me at all. I'm going to see my abuser at my wedding, at all these family functions, because that's what it means to have a family, right? It's like I'm constantly attached to my greatest pain and wounding. And so at the end of the day, I did circle back, and she had just lost her husband of decades. So she was not able to have that conversation. And the fawner in me goes, well, I can wait a little
Give
bit
it time,
longer.
baby. Give it some time.
3 decades or more. Surely that's not enough. Like now she's grieving. And so I circled back again. And, through various means, and if people are interested, read the memoir because it's all in there. But at the end of the day, she just wasn't able to do it, right? And so I don't even know that it was I had said prior, if we can't have a real conversation, I cannot have you in my life. But I don't know that there was another moment where I was like, well, here's the moment, right? Like you're incapable. It was just like I cannot do this. I cannot. Oh, in fact, I sent a text. That's what it was, because something had happened. And I was like, psh, that's it, right? I'm not going to keep pretending. You can't keep pretending like we have this happy family life. None of it's real. Um, do not contact me. And
Did
that,
she respond?
I think it was her response to that was, it's a response that a lot of us get, which is like, I can't change the past. And, we all make mistakes. And I'm like, but I don't recall you mentioning any mistakes that you've actually made, right? And I'm not asking you to change the past. I'm actually asking you to show up differently now. But it was a reflection of the same thing dressed up in language that someone might have perceived as like, I love you. In fact, I want to have a relationship. I love you, but there was no there, right? And so that was it. And it was several years like that. And meanwhile, my son's getting older and that feels more complicated and all the things that we have to go through along those lines. But what also was happening is I was working with a brilliant trauma therapist and doing more of this work and working more with my clients, which always reinforces my own understanding and healing. And
Mm.
it's like those young parts of me that could not tolerate a mother who never protected me. They finally know that I'm here. I'm here. I can protect us in ways that I was not capable of before, but I don't feel that vulnerable, that much of a raw nerve, honestly, to anyone, right? It's like I finally have skin. And now that I have skin, my boundaries have shifted a bit. And I have seen her with my son for my son's sake specifically. We
Mm.
have revisited the conversation. And basically, she said, well, she read my memoir and she told a friend that she believed me. So that was one step in the process. She didn't tell me, but she told a friend who told me. And when I tried to have the conversation again, not too long ago, um, she cannot do it. She cannot have the conversation. And then I said, well, then I'm going to have to close this door again. And she said, but I can listen. I can
Mm.
listen. And so I said every single thing you can possibly imagine in a tone that you can also imagine. And I said all of the things, and particularly now as a mom with a child and imagining him coming to me for help and um, my not only not giving it to him, but like making him the bad guy. I said it all, and she heard it. And she admitted I was a bad mom and I didn't do right
Mm.
by you. And she said a lot of other things that felt a little like, ugh, you still don't get it. But she showed up to the degree that she could. And then she said, can you please, 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 please forgive me? And in that moment, I really searched my body and I was like, I can. I can. It doesn't mean we're like hanging out or, having regular conversations. She knows about this book. I said, you know what? At the end of the day, I can forgive you and you never have to talk about it. But you need to know that I'm never going to stop
Mm.
because talking about it has saved my life and returned me to me. And it's helping other people. And so, this is the reality now. And she said, I get it. And I'm proud of you. And I don't want you to stop. So little inroads.
It's yeah. And it just like goes to show just shame is so like mind-blowing and baffling.
That's right.
Just um how we're willing, some people are would rather lose a relationship with a child
Yeah.
than face the shame of themselves. And I know it's not a conscious
Right.
choice,
Right.
but it just the mental gymnastics that go on, just how powerful like the brain is,
Yeah.
that it will convince someone that it's cutting off your child is the better option
Yeah.
between looking at the ways you screwed up.
But I don't even think she would ever say cutting off my child, even though I flat out said, you're the one who's making this decision by not engaging with me.
Losing a relationship with the
Yes.
child.
In her mind, she's thinking, well, gosh, Ingrid just can't get over this. I hope she gets over it one day, you know?
Yes. Yeah, I just came across this like woman's Instagram who she's like taking like the opposite approach of like how kids that cut off their parents are so entitled and bratty, and the first time that you say no to your kids then they cut you off, and I'm like, wow, this is like a huge marketplace
Yes.
for gassing up all these parents
Yes.
who just won't like take accountability for the ways that
Yes.
they screwed up. I was like, oh, I had to do everything in me to not like comment on it.
It's such a shame, but to be honest, as a part of like marketing this Fawning book, there was a big piece in the New York Times that my book was included in. And the title of the article was, Is Self-Help Just Turning Everyone into Being a Jerk? Right? I'm paraphrasing, but that was literally the title. And again, it just misses the mark. It's like, am I entitled? Am I a jerk? Or am I finally just feeling like the effects of what happened to me? Am I trying to have a voice for the first time? Am I trying to do the thing that y'all have been telling me to do my whole life, which is set a healthy boundary?
Mm, mhm.
But you want me to set a healthy boundary that doesn't ruffle any of your feathers. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's just not how it works. And so I think it's easy to couch it in that way, that it's about entitlement. And again, I go, this is similar for people that cannot wrap their heads around a fawn response. They're just like, that's not even a thing. And what are you talking about? And it's just manipulation or whatever they want to say. And I go, you know what you're telling me right now is that you've never been disempowered a day in your life. And God bless you. I'm so glad that you have no clue what I am even talking about. And don't you dare tell me what my experience has been or judge it if you have not walked one single day in my shoes.
Hell yes.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to um obviously you have somewhat of a relationship with your mom now, but I am curious what the grieving looked like as far
Oh,
as
did
coming
I
to
skip over
terms.
that,
Yeah,
Andrea?
I'm circling back.
Did I sort of
No,
leave
it's
that
okay.
one
We
on the
went
cutting
all
room
over. We're
floor?
meandering.
Oh goodness. Well, I mean,
Let me
we
just say this first
yeah.
before, like, one thing that I've really been coming to terms with over the past several months for me
Yeah.
is, I realize how much me intellectualizing
Yes.
my parents is really cutting me off from experiencing just like the deep sadness of the
Mm.
reality of the situation with my parents.
You
Like,
said it better than I could say, right? Is that real grieving means dropping into just the reality, the painful reality, not figuring it out or understanding it or riding on top of the experience because I'm going to pack it in all this like clinical language or whatever. And, you know, when I was writing the memoir and shortly after I had this evidence that like even all these years later my mom was in fact not going to say, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry that happened and let's have a real conversation." That feeling, that very vulnerable, primitive, wounded, "Oh my god, the person that's supposed to love me dropped me and is essentially saying they would do it again." Like I mean it just there was no pain like that pain, and I remember 2 things. 1, sleeping next to Yancey as it was like the grief was coming for me, and I was like, "No, no, no. No, I don't wanna feel this." It's like I was willing myself not to feel it, and it wouldn't let me run this time. And
mm,
the feeling of lying next to, whew, the contrast, in other words, of lying next to the person that was holding more space and more love for me than I'd ever held my entire life, and yet feeling this feeling of the mother wound coming for me, being like, you never really mattered to begin with. It was like, I felt like, talk about shame. I mean, it was just, I felt slimed. I felt mired in this goo that was like, even my husband must not be real. I'm not meant for this world. I mean, it just sucks you in. It sucked me into a very dark place. And I did not want him to know that I was feeling it. I didn't want him to see me cry. I felt not ugly physically, but there was like this too ugly for the world kind of a thing, right? And I had to like slink quietly out of bed and go into the bathroom and sob like I hadn't sobbed my entire life until there was no energy left, right? And so that was one big scene, one big moment. But talk about the millions of moments in between. Talk about the moment of me selling this book, Fawning, right? I went from deciding that I'm going to validate my own story and I'm going to self-publish my memoir, and it was the most healing and helpful thing I'd ever done. Fast forward, and I'm sitting in 14 different meetings with major publishers, and they're all like, Ingrid, we want you to write this book on fawning. And I was in London for a conference when I got the news that Penguin Random House was, basically taking the book off the table before anyone else could scoop it up. And I'm sitting on the plane coming home, and that feeling when you have a parent that's alive, but you can't really call him and tell him, like, I did this thing. That's another moment of grief, right? That's another moment of grief. My son goes through things where I go, God, as a parent, right? It's so lonely sometimes as a parent, but to not be able to reach back to that other link in the chain and be like, hey, I'm going through this thing. I could use the support. There's just countless and countless moments and opportunities where I have to pause and slow down. And so even coming back from London, I had to open my laptop and I was like writing a letter to myself and feeling all the feelings. And when that became too much, I had to go in the airplane bathroom and have a huge sob and sort of just like come back to the seat and keep going, right? So it's this ongoing process. This type of grief is like every other kind of grief when you're talking about loss, where you think you're doing just fine, and then out of nowhere, you just get this blow, right? And it's often in these unusual circumstances, you're like, well, I thought it would happen here, but boy, it's really caught me off guard. So, weathering the storms of these grief patterns that move through my system is a big part of the ongoing process of healing. And new memories arise, even that I didn't know about from before. Other parts, the longer I do this parts work, boy, they are holding some history and some wisdom that I can understand why I forgot, I can understand.
Anything you'd be willing to share? Something that's popped up recently?
No, I'm not going to go there yet. It's not
Too fresh?
metabolized enough.
Okay.
And I still only have fragments, so it wouldn't feel fair to what I feel like is emerging. But I'm going to trust the process that's emerging. I'm going to trust this process and the parts, just like I trusted the writing that came before, and know that my life is dedicated to this process of reclaiming me and taking care of myself, whatever that looks like.
I really that what you spoke to about, when you were flying back from London, like that, I can relate to it, and I know so many people can, of that unique pain that comes from having your parents have a disinterest, like, in your life, you know? Like, there's something that's very, it really, really hits the gut.
Yeah, and I think I didn't even know those things really. I hadn't felt them really until I started writing them about them in the memoir, and then I could see like, oh yeah, you never came to see me at college or where I lived, or I moved across the country and you never came to see me there. Oh, I got a PhD and you didn't come to graduation. All of these things. And so fast forward to this moment of like selling the book, and it's just, you're not just feeling the grief of that moment, you're feeling it for a lifetime of those experiences, where here you are doing it alone in this way again, right? Obviously I had my friends and my husband, but it's different.
Mm. Well, I'm so proud of you. And you're
Oh,
such a beautiful example of like the reality, the hard truth of this messy ass healing journey. that
Yeah,
we're
that's what it
on,
is.
that it's
Yeah.
unfortunately, folks, it's never ends.
Yeah.
And
But
that's
it does
good.
get better, wouldn't you say? I mean,
Yes.
if it didn't also return me to me in ways that like I couldn't have written this book. Are you kidding me? I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of this work that I'm putting into the world. This feels like it blows my mind that my life has led up to my ability to do this. You know, you talk about that fawning presentation where I don't want to be too big because I'm a target. It's like, oh my gosh, can I get over how big I am in my life right now? And I'm still terrified. There are parts of me that are like, what's the blowback going to be? But I know without a doubt that the richness and the community and the goodness and the healing is going to be so much bigger than anything else that could ever come from me. And even if it does, I have my own back. I know who I am. I know my intentions. I know that I'm not saying I have it all figured out. I'm saying, can we just have this aspect of the conversation already? This is just my contribution, right? So, it almost doesn't matter even if someone does come for me because I'm going to be able to say like, okay, well, what's about you in that? You know, not just own it like, oh, I'm bad. I did something wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, heaven forbid we consider that maybe it has nothing to do with us.
If at us at all. That's right.
Well, on behalf of all the fawners out there, thank you so much for writing this book. Is there anything about this book that you want to share that I haven't asked?
No, you asked the best questions. Thank you for unpacking this even more. I mean, I feel like even this conversation gives me a chance to sort of know myself more, to love myself more. And you give that to your listeners. It's a huge gift what you do. I'm so glad you're back.
And I want to give you kudos to the amazing work that you're doing on behalf of being a mom too. So,
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
yeah.
that.